everybody, I miss you so much and I'm so excited that you're joining me today. Today I will be doing an experiment to demonstrate how water can change shape as it changes state of matter. So before I continue, I would like to review what we talked about on our last meeting about the water cycle. And while I'm explaining the water cycle, I will be incorporating how water changes states of matter during the water cycle as well. So not only will it be changing the state of matter in this experiment, but it also changes state of matter every day in the water cycle. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the water cycle. I just want to review it briefly. So as we talked about last time, the stages of the water cycle are precipitation, evaporation, and condensation. Now it's not like a line where it begins and ends somewhere. It's a circle, so it continues and goes on and on and on. So what I want to talk about is how it relates to changes in state of matter. So let's pretend it's a winter day and it's snowing outside. So as the precipitation is what comes out of the clouds, so it's snowing, which is a solid, water in solid form, comes down onto the ground and it stays on the ground as a solid, but then the sun comes out and the heat from the sun turns the snow into a liquid. So it goes from a solid to a liquid because of the sun, because the sun is hot and the snow is cold. So because of that temperature change, the water changed its state of matter and went from a solid to a liquid. Now the sun stays out for a few hours, okay, so it gets hotter, and then it starts to evaporate, so it goes back into the clouds as a gas. Now the liquid goes from a liquid to a gas because of the heat, and it changed its state of matter. And then the water as a gas goes up into the clouds, and it forms a cloud because it's cold up in the sky. So to review, the snow comes out of the sky cold, and then it goes onto the ground. The sun is hot and it heats it up, so it turns into water, into liquid water. And then it goes back up into the sky as a gas because the liquid water got even hotter, so then it went back up into the clouds, and then it formed a cloud because it was cold up there and it went from hot to cold. So we're going to kind of see how that happens. We're going to see how water can change its state of matter in our house. Alright, so now that I reviewed the water cycle, I'm going to move on to what we will be doing today. Before I do that though, I want you to think about an example of a time that you saw water change its state of matter. Was it a time that it was winter outside and you were playing in the snow, but then the sun came out, so the snow melted? That would be an example, because the heat from the sun made the water change its state of matter. Water went from a solid, snow, to a liquid, water. So that's an example. Maybe another example is you took an ice cube out and you put it outside to see what would happen. Well, the sun made the ice cube melt. It went from a solid to a liquid. So today, I will be doing an experiment using a cup, a freezer, and some water to see how temperature changes state of matter. Now this is something that you can do at your house too. You can do it after the video, you can do it with me, you can replay the video to do it with me, whatever you prefer. But before I begin, I'm going to state our objectives so we know what we're learning today. So as you can see, our objective today is I can observe how water changes when the temperature changes. So before we start our experiment, we have to talk about two vocabulary words that are quite important to make sure this experiment makes sense. So our two important vocabulary words today are hypothesis and observation. So the definition for hypothesis is an educated guess that someone makes during an experiment. So scientists and researchers make hypotheses before they conduct an experiment because they want to see if their educated guess is supported by the evidence of the experiment. So my hypothesis for this experiment, which we will be testing and you guys will be evaluating if the evidence supports my hypothesis or not at the end. So my hypothesis is if the water undergoes a temperature change, then the water will change its state of matter. Our next vocabulary word is observation, and that is what you will be doing during the experiment as you watch me on this video. So an observation is something that someone sees or hears during an experiment. So in the little table, well, it's not little, but in the table that I have on your handout, I would like you to write down what you see and hear in the box that says observation for each step of the experiment. Before we begin, I want to remind you that you're going to be making observations during the experiment. So during this experiment, I want you to fill out the table on the handout that you got. And if you forget something or I'm going too fast, you can always pause the video or rewind based on where you are on your handout. But this is very important to make sure, I want to make sure that you're understanding me, because I know sometimes it's hard when we're not in class together, so you can't ask your questions. But please submit this handout to Seesaw when you are finished with it, so I know that you completed this activity. Okay, so I think we're ready to start our experiment, so get excited because it's really cool. So I have my cup and I'm gonna fill it up with water. Only a little bit because it won't be in the freezer for very long. So now that I have my cup of water, it is a liquid. So first I'm gonna let the water sit for a little bit. As you can tell, it's still in there, even though you can't really see it. Make sure whenever you do this at home, you have a clear glass, if at all possible, because that way you can see how the water changes. If you don't have a clear glass, that's okay too, but a clear glass does work the best. But right now I'm going to let it sit out for a little bit so it can become room temperature. And then a way to find out the temperature that your house is at is to look at your thermostat. If you can't find it, ask a sister or a brother or a family member and they can help you find it. This is what my thermostat looks like. As you can see, it's 80 degrees in my house. So that would be the temperature that I would write down in the table under the beginning temperature. You can see I wrote down what temperature it is currently, and now I think it is ready to be put in the freezer. Now my freezer says that it's 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Now if you're doing this experiment at home, I know that not all freezers are the same temperature, but for the purposes of this experiment, you can write down 10 degrees Fahrenheit because we'll still get the same results. So now that I have the temperature of my freezer, we're gonna open it up and put the glass of water inside. Okay. All right, y'all, now's the moment of truth. It's been 2 hours, so let's check and see. Ooh, it got a little frosty on the outside. I like what I see. So let's go ahead. Oh, no way. All right, so if you look at it, go ahead and write down what you see. You don't really hear anything, so that's okay. Just write down what you see. So now now that we saw how the temperature changed when it went from 80 to 10, we're gonna see how it changes when it goes back to 80 degrees. So we're gonna watch it, and for 2 hours, we're gonna set our timer and then come back and check on it in 2 hours. So now my 2 hours is up, so I came back to check on it, and it's liquid. So now, make your observations as to what happened. There's still a little bit of ice in there, but for the most part, it's a liquid, so it can swirl around. And remember, this is at 80 degrees. So now that our experiment is finished, let's review what we saw. So in your chart, I want to make sure that you have it all filled out. So step 1 was put the glass of water into the freezer. So first I filled it up, and I want you to circle which state of matter that was when I filled up the water. And remember, the temperature that goes in the next column is the temperature that my house is at. So the state of matter after the temperature change. So when I took it out, what state of matter was it? Was it a solid, liquid, or gas? So I'm not going to tell you what it was because we kind of described it and talked about what we saw. So this is a way for me to see what you learned from the experiment. And then the temperature was the temperature of the freezer, and then your observations. I would like you to at least write 2 observations that you found, but if you could only think of 1, that's okay too. I just want to make sure that you're writing down what you observed. For the second row, it's taking the glass out of the freezer. So when I took the glass out of the freezer, was it a solid, liquid, or a gas? And then next to that, remember the temperature is the temperature of the freezer. And then the state of the matter after the temperature change, so after I let it sit out in my house, just in the room temperature, which was 80 degrees, what did it turn into, a solid, liquid, or a gas? And then I want you to write 2 observations in the observations column. Okay? So if you have any questions, you can ask me on Seesaw or email me, but that should cover the table. So then the next question on your handout was Miss Ellsworth's hypothesis supported? So remember, my hypothesis was if the water undergoes a temperature change, the water changes its state of matter. Was that supported? Yes or no? Okay, so by all the evidence that we found in this experiment, was my hypothesis supported? Yes or no? So now I want to touch on that water isn't the only thing that changes its state of matter. For example, ice cream. If you get ice cream from an ice cream parlor on a sunny day, the sun will melt it sometimes before you get to eat it. So because of the temperature change, the ice cream melted. So this happens to a lot of things in our environment. And so I want you to draw 2 examples that you can think of in your environment, at home, at school, at the store. Go ahead and draw those, or you can write them if you would prefer, that you can think of. So that way we can relate this experiment to the real world. I wanted to thank you for joining me today, and just remember that you can do this experiment at home too. It doesn't take too long, and it's something that you can do while you're just chilling out at home. So I am looking forward to seeing your responses on Seesaw, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.